Well, give me a concrete example of how you use the press this way, how a false story is planted and how you got it published.
Well, for example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa, and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Times, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he had gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Times. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was. And we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims. And then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbundu women who supposedly had been their victims.
But these were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort. Totally false propaganda.
The death toll continues to climb over 1,900 people as Israel continues to bombard south of the country on the border of the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, to the north, continued airstrikes on Lebanese militants, the threat of an expanding war, and also the continued ramping up of propaganda on both sides, which basically goes to accepting a narrative role in the global media. So let's talk about the recent news. Palestinians scramble for safety as Israel pounds off Gaza Strip to punish Hamas. Israeli warplanes hammered the Gaza Strip neighborhood by neighborhood Tuesday, reducing buildings to rubble, sending people scrambling to find safety in the tiny sealed-off territory, now suffering severe retaliation for the deadly weekend attack by Hamas militants. Humanitarian groups pleaded for the creation of corridors to get aid into Gaza and warned that hospitals, overwhelmed with wounded people, were running out of supplies. Israel has stopped entry of food, fuel, and medicines into Gaza, and the sole remaining access from Egypt shut down Tuesday after airstrikes hit near the border crossing. The war, which has now claimed over 1,900 lives on both sides, is expected to escalate. The weekend attack that Hamas said was retribution for worsening conditions for Palestinians under Israeli occupation has inflamed Israel's determination to crush the group's hold in Gaza. New exchanges of fire over Israel's northern border with militants in Lebanon and Syria on Tuesday pointed to the risk of an expanding regional conflict. Hamas militants stormed into Israel on Saturday morning, slaying hundreds of residents and homes and streets near the Gaza border and bringing gun battles to Israeli towns for the first time in decades. Hamas and other militant groups in Gaza hold about 150 soldiers and civilians hostage, according to Israel. Israel stepped up its offensive on Tuesday, expanding the mobilization of reservists to 360,000. Israel's military said it had regained effective control over areas Hamas attacked in the south and of the Gaza border. A looming question: whether Israel will launch a ground assault into Gaza, a 40-kilometer, 25-mile strip of land wedged among Israel, Egypt, and the Mediterranean Sea that is home to 2.3 million people and has been governed by Hamas since 2007. Rescue officials in Gaza said large numbers of people were still trapped under the remnants of leveled buildings, with rescue equipment and ambulances unable to reach the area. On Tuesday, a large part of Gaza's Ramal neighborhood was reduced to rubble after hours of airstrikes the night before. Residents found buildings torn in half or demolished to mounds of concrete and rebar. Cars were flattened and trees burned out on residential streets transformed into moonscapes. Palestinian civil defense forces pulled Abdullah Musla out of the basement together with 30 others after apartment buildings were flattened. I sell toys, not missiles, the 46-year-old said, weeping. I want to leave Gaza. Why do I have to stay here? I lost my home and my job. The Israeli military said it struck hundreds of targets in Ramallah, an upscale district home to ministries of the Hamas government, universities, media organizations, and the aid agencies' offices. In a new tactic, Israel warning civilians to evacuate neighborhood after neighborhood and then inflicting devastation, what could be a prelude to a ground offensive. On Tuesday, the military told residents of the nearby Al-Daraj neighborhood to evacuate. New explosions soon rocked it off into other areas, continuing into the night. Now let's see what the Times of Israel has to say. Israeli jets hit 200 targets in Gaza City, terrorist military says. U.S. President Joe Biden reportedly urged Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during their Tuesday phone call to minimize civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip as Israel continues its massive aerial campaign of readiness for a potential ground incursion in response to Hamas' terror onslaught. While Biden offered full-throttle support for Israel in a public address Tuesday that was overwhelmingly welcomed by Jerusalem, he apparently struck a relative more balanced tone in his call with Netanyahu. Biden was more than direct in prior calls that the IDF should have worked to avoid civilian casualties, embassy reports citing 2 U.S. officials. Meanwhile, the U.S. has coordinated with Egypt to establish a humanitarian corridor for Palestinian civilians, as well as the several hundred U.S. citizens in the Strip to evacuate the coast of Enclave, NBC News. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has ordered a siege on Gaza, including halting the supply of electricity, food, and water. The IDF also bombed the Rafah crossing, blocking the only land exit the coastal enclave to Egypt in what ostensibly would have sensibly complicate efforts to establish a humanitarian corridor. So what we have basically is a systematic and very coordinated effort to destroy Gaza town by town, city by city, every square inch of the area. This way, they can absolutely destroy the land and then replace the land with Israeli-owned settlements to ensure that the removal of Gaza is complete and that the threat of Hamas is complete, because the bigger picture wasn't about the elimination of Hamas or Gaza. It's the elimination, the preconceived threat of the Arab world in the Israeli government's eyes. And that is the threat of Hezbollah and Syria, Lebanon, and of course, Iran. And there's a tentative agreement with the Gulf currently with Saudi Arabia to keep them alive as long as they can remain the superpower that they are, because unlike Libya, unlike Pakistan, unlike Iran, Saudi Arabia still holds the world's most plentiful oil fields, opposite of the Caspian Sea, which is north of Iran, incidentally enough. So he who controls the oil controls much of the Earth's financial district. And also war, because with oil you can replenish tanks and whatnot, cars and jeeps and whatnot. As long as the wars continue, so will the oil and the consumption of it. In fact, during the 1980s and 90s, 80% of the world's oil went to conflicts all over the world. So while they're fighting for oil reserves, they're using the oil to support the wars, incidentally enough, if that makes sense. And of course, in the last 24 hours, as soon as the Hamas operatives began their incursion into Gaza, into Israel, I'm sorry, not Gaza, but into Israel, killing civilians, dozens and dozens, hundreds of civilians, comes propaganda. And propaganda from both sides. Now, we see the power of propaganda, as what John Stockwell said in the beginning of the video, who was a CIA station chief in Angola in the 1960s and 70s, was that propaganda is a useful tool. And what it could do is basically manipulate the public perception to agree to a narrative. Now, whatever that narrative may be, whether it is to support a coup d'etat or to support a dissolution of a foreign government, or in this case, when it comes to swaying public perception and agreeing to even atrocities. And isn't that what Malcolm X once said? That if you're not careful, the media will have you accepting and believing and approving of atrocities on a poorer people. Now, in this case, what we see is Hamas propaganda portraying, showing the slaying of Israeli citizens as a positive outlook. Now, that's not swaying the public perception, because any rational and moral human being will look at that and say it's repugnant. But to the poorer Arabs who see subjugation, who see poverty as a way to grow with these groups or to assimilate into these groups because they have no other choice. Look what we're doing to the Jew, which is considered the enemy. Well, that's very persuasive. Al-Qaeda in the late 1980s learned from the Haqqani network about the power of propaganda. Because one thing about Jalaluddin Haqqani, who's the founder of the Haqqani network, who is the leader of the Haqqani nexus in Afghanistan, well, he used propaganda to persuade other Afghanis and Arabs to basically enter the war in Afghanistan against the Soviets. And Abdullah Azzam saw this and knew the power of persuasion and began his journey around the world to call for jihad. Well, Al-Qaeda learned from the Haqqani network about the power of propaganda, and they perfected it more so than the Haqqani network. And they created their own media arm called As-Sahab Media. Bin Laden allowed for As-Sahab Media to basically interview martyrs and interview Al-Qaeda members to basically come to Afghanistan training camps to join Al-Qaeda. And this was a very powerful tool. And after the embassy bombings in '98, that's when we saw Al-Qaeda really begin a broader network inside Afghanistan. Arabs coming from Algeria, Egypt, even the United States, Great Britain, United Kingdom, Pakistan. Some of these countries that were coming, some of these people that were coming from these other countries also were on the intelligence network. So in other words, while these radical Islamists were joining Al-Qaeda, the intelligence network were basically now concentrating on Al-Qaeda. So in other words, along with these militants, because they're ignorant and they're illiterate, they don't know any better, that they're being followed by foreign and domestic intelligence. So who knows who's joining these ranks as well, as you could see what I'm talking about. On the other hand, Israeli propaganda even works. And we saw that with the latest regarding one such story about a German Israeli woman whose name escapes me, forgive me. Basically, in the less than 24 hours after the attack, she was at a rave and she was seen dancing. And she had an account on Instagram, I saw it, and she's, dancing and stuff. Meanwhile, this is taken moments before the Al-Qassam brigades came and basically started slaughtering, and killed 260 people at this rave. And basically were killing, not just Israeli citizens, but foreign citizens as well. And they used this on their own networks and their own profiles. Now, at the same time, Israeli networks began showing this and saying, well, look, they killed these people. And she's seen in the back of a truck, of a Jeep, Meanwhile, you have these Arabs, and basically they're saying they're Hamas. Now, we don't know if they're Hamas because later on, there was a video showing this woman's mother saying that she is alive. It's reported that she's alive. Now, granted, she could basically be in denial, saying that, she's not dead. But according to other reports, that Palestinians actually saved her from Hamas and drove her to a hospital. Now, those reports are coming from Palestinian websites, which contradict the Israeli narrative and which was broadcasted all over American media, and basically saying, you see, this is what they're doing. They're raping these women. They're killing these women. Meanwhile, these reports are only coming from Israeli and Western-backed outlets. So what to believe, right? Now we're stuck in this paralyzation of what to believe and what to not believe instead of knowing something. That's why I'm very adamant about portraying a channel to the public about information. And why are you so dry in your information? Because information is the only thing that matters. I don't have to bring you a song and dance. The information is all that you need. Whether I'm singing it or bringing some comedy to it or bringing some life to it, I'm just more, or my main goal is to inform the public the best I can, the honest as I can, because that's the only way we're going to have a real movement that can bring about change. You can't bring about change by believing in something, because you could believe whatever you want. Do you know it? And in this case, along with every conflict in history, there's always lies and the facts. And most of the information is disinformation, manipulation, propaganda. And what intelligence agency does it the best? Well, the CIA does. Now you have multiple agencies that do it across the board. So what to believe? Now, isn't it unfortunate that in this day and age, we can't believe our own legacy media here in the States? Let's go to an article by NPR News, right? Video game clips and old videos are flooding social media about Israel and Gaza. One viral video claims to show a Hamas fighter shooting down an Israeli helicopter, but it's a clip from the video game Arma 3. A video purporting to show an Israeli woman being attacked in Gaza was filmed in 2015 in Guatemala. An unverified voice message circulating on WhatsApp, along with the note forwarded many times, says a military official has instructed Israelis to stock up on cash, fuel, and groceries. Fake accounts posing as a BBC journalist and the Jerusalem Post newspaper spread false information widely before being suspended by X, formerly known as Twitter. And as you could see, here's the problem facing the public. In the wake of Hamas' surprise attack on Israel and the escalation into war over the weekend, social media platforms and messaging apps are awash in viral rumors, misleading images and videos, and outright falsehoods, making it hard for people in Israel, Gaza, and around the world seeking information and facts about the conflict. This is not a coincidence. This is direct and it's intentional. And like I said, it is basically to keep you in a state of paralysis and also to persuade who? The easily manipulated. Those who don't know how to do research. Those who don't know how to discern fact from fiction because they have a preconceived narrative, whether it's politics, religion, racism, or a combination of all of these things. For example, if you are a Christian evangelical, you're basically going to believe Israeli Zionists or Israeli-owned media or American media, and basically propagate that information because that's what you are affiliated with. You're not going to read Arab state media. You're not going to read Gaza media because you are considering them disinformation. For the same fact that leftists won't watch Fox News because they consider Fox News conservative values, Christian, evangelical Christian values, and they are fascists. And everybody along with them are the enemy in disinformation. Conservatives consider leftists, socialists, anarchists, BLM, Antifa, and CNN and MSNBC can be dismissed. And what this does, the danger of this does, is that instead of reading the information and then taking that information as an individual, taking that information and then discerning what is true and what is not, now you're being manipulated to take information and dismiss it because it's on a platform you don't agree with. It's intentional because you're going to have opposing narratives that are only believing the platforms that they agree with on ideology, not knowing that they are just propagating state narratives or state information, which is disinformation or even outright falsehoods. If Fox News or CNN put a blaring headline saying this story is blatantly false, the people who are propagating that platform are basically going to post that story and say, this is information I can agree with. I mean, it's almost come to this. How horrifying is this? How dangerous this is. Many online videos are being taken out of context or mischaracterized. A frequent occurrence in breaking news situation where interest is high, but verified information is hard to come by. It's worse. Now, this is the main reason why I started viral media in the first place. Because when I was studying 9/11, for example, back in 2006, and I didn't start viral media because, I want to know what I was talking about. If I was going to make viral media, I want to know that the information that I know was verified and right through the historical record, through verified accounts, through information and evidence. When I started seeing disinformation about 9/11, I was appalled. And maybe I was being naive on platforms like Twitter and Facebook back in 2014, 15. And when I started seeing disinformation like no planes and holograms, I couldn't believe people really believe that. It's amazing what people will believe. So I started viral media, and I don't like the sound of my voice. I don't like the way I look, and that's a self-conscious issue. But I said, to hell with that. Who cares what I sound like or look like? All that matters to me is information being shared with the public consciousness in an honest fashion. I also naively believe that, we should have media that acts this way. And, as I got to know, I got a little bit older, I started, disassociating from TV overall, because I think TV is cancer, brain cancer, really is poison. And that the inconsequential things that I once, followed, like sports, really doesn't matter in the long run, because that's not what's important. Now, if you want to take a break from the real world and watch sports, I have no problem with that. But my goodness, the important issues that count really needs to be in the public consciousness first and foremost. Don't you agree? Now, with that being said, I started my viral media because of the simple fact that there was been a wash of disinformation regarding 9/11. More so now than ever. And this is what they did with the Iraq War. Remember the testimony of Nurse Naria back in 1990, where she basically gave testimony to the Senate inquiry about Iraqi soldiers throwing babies out of incubators in a Kuwaiti hospital. and leaving them to die on the floor, when it so happened that information never existed because it didn't happen. But what happened was that the American media took that and basically said, look at what these people are doing. They're evil. And it gave the public consciousness approval for war, in which, we destroyed them in a week. Killed many people involved. Fast forward to 13 years later, and the American media again was awash with disinformation regarding Iraq, because what did Colin Powell do? He went before the National Security Council and held up a vial of white powder and said it was anthrax, a chemical agent. And basically, this is what Iraq was working with Al-Qaeda on. And what did he show as evidence to the United Nations Security Council? Cartoon pictures of underground caverns that were elaborate. No, not actual pictures. No, I'm not making this up. Cartoon character pictures. That's what it came down to. And the United Nations Security Council said, well, it's not evidence for anything, but will approve for war. And they did, with an overwhelming vote. Now, what's the essence of propaganda? What is the reason for disinformation? What is the goal in this context? For Hamas, it's to recruit a quickly depleting organization that doesn't care about a long run, only cares about a destruction of a state that they can't destroy. Same thing like Al-Qaeda. When they made the planes operation, which is the 9/11 attacks, there was like I said in the previous video, there was a disagreement within Al-Qaeda that, this is a bad idea because, how do you defeat a superpower? Well, we'll drag them in a Vietnam type situation, just like the Soviets in '79, and that's how they'll drain their economy. Well, he was half right. Can't defeat a superpower like the United States. Well, Hamas went for a different reason. Hamas said, we'll just kill Jews and that's it. There is no long run. We can't defeat them. We'll just hurt them. Not knowing that in the long run, it will not hurt them, but it'll hurt the Palestinians. So that just goes to automatically show that Hamas doesn't care about Palestinians, and that the Palestinians basically don't support Hamas. Now, you could say, well, they were our elected government. How about this? Think of it like this. You're in an enclosed environment in jail. The majority of people in jail aren't in gangs. Yet the gangs control the environment. Why? Because the people in jail can't do anything about it. They have no weapons. They have no means. They have very few finances. And they don't have each other. That's for one. For two, the gangs have the means. The gangs have the weapons. And the gangs have the finances. So in other words, gangs like the Aryan Brotherhood or La M or 18th Street or the Black Guerrilla family, which are the leading gangs in United States prisons, they control almost every single federal prison in the United States. How is that even possible? How is it the Aryan Brotherhood, which were led by Bingham and Terry Mills, I think one of them is dead, but they're actually in 23-hour lockdown in Adamax prison. How are they running the Aryan Brotherhood? Even in the most closed, most guarded environment in the world, they're still running prisons. So that just goes to show you that even if they're under lock and key under the ground, which is Super Adamax prison, they could still control the environment in prison, order killings, order drugs, order rapes, order, beatings, even outside the prison. So think of it like this. The Palestinians are in that prison because that's what Gaza is. It's a prison. They're surrounded by military checkpoints, and they have to get approval from the Israeli military to move about, and the police. Meanwhile, you have a small organized group called Hamas. You have another one called the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And they have the weapons. They have the money. Do you think the Palestinians as a whole have any choice but to vote for these people in the first place? Just like the prisoners have any choice in these American prisons to go along with these groups or die? But the Palestinians could basically go to the Israeli military and just say, "Hey, we have Hamas operatives, and they're persuading us to vote or persuading us to do things we don't want to do." Do you think the Israelis give a damn about what a Palestinian thinks? Now, that's not a whole charge on the IDF. I mean, we have soldiers, former IDF soldiers, who basically have come out and empathize with Palestinians. In fact, there's a great and wonderful organization called Breaking the Silence, which is basically an organization made up of former IDF soldiers who have come out and basically testified about the brutality of the Israeli military and their police, the psychological and the military operations that are taking place. Now, at the same time, you have spies within these towns in Gaza, in the West Bank, basically in Gaza. You have an Israeli military unit called the Mr. Avrim, who are acting as Palestinians, living alongside these Arab neighborhoods in Gaza. Not in the West Bank, but in Gaza. Feeding information, which makes you think, how did these attacks take place in the first? And as we saw, Egypt intelligence even warned about them, that an attack was coming. Now, the perception is that for propaganda to work, we need to publicly persuade the people to accept the brutalities that are coming. Why? Because the goal was to destroy Palestinian two-statehood, even if it means supporting Hamas in the first place. Now, don't take my word for it. Here's an article by Jerusalem Post by Lahav Yarkov on March 12, 2019, entitled, "Netanyahu, Money to Hamas, Part of Strategy to Keep Palestinians Divided." Quote, "Now that we are supervising the Israeli government and military, we know it's going to humanitarian causes," quote, the source said, paraphrasing Netanyahu. If you go down, and I'll put this in the link in the description, the prime minister also said, "Whoever is against a Palestinian state should be for transferring the funds to Gaza, because maintaining a separation between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza helps prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state." It's coming from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This is not propaganda. This is not conspiracy. This was the whole point of keeping Hamas alive, barely alive, so that they could justify not just subjugating the Palestinians, but to destroy the whole idea of a two-state, which is the reason why there was a creation of Fatah and the Abu Nidal organization, was to supplement the sympathizers in Europe for the Palestinian Liberation Organization in the 1970s. And then in the 80s was the creation of Hamas by Yassin, Sheikh Yassin, supported by the Israeli military. And I read you that article just yesterday. They don't have to create these groups outright. Like I said, just need a heartbeat. and give that heartbeat extra additional limbs. And it becomes a body. And it becomes a mind. That's all. You don't need to create an organization. Just need to give it life. Now, if you don't want to believe that, well, take it from Netanyahu's own military. And I'll just disappear for a second so you can read the entire tweet, which I saw today. General Gershon Hakon, emphatically right-wing, who's a Zionist, by the way, confidant of Benjamin Netanyahu, said the following, quote, "Truth be told, Netanyahu's objective is to prevent the two-state option and therefore turned Hamas into his closest ally. Openly, Hamas is the enemy beneath the surface, an ally." End quote. That's not coming from third-hand accounts. It's not coming from the legacy media. It's not coming from Hamas. It's coming from Netanyahu and Netanyahu's own generals. Because that's what this was all about. And that's why they need the power of manipulation. And through that comes the dissemination of propaganda. Now, in the next couple of days, as the Israeli military surrounds Gaza and begins their incursion and bombardment from the air and land, they're going to need a full supply of propaganda in order to keep you supporting the war crimes that are about to come and that are happening. The power of persuasion. As Mark Curtis once opined in The Power of Nightmares. And with the power of persuasion, any moral person could suddenly approve of atrocities and basically ignore or become apathetic to the plight of not just Palestinians, but to humanity itself.